Good morning, boys and girls. Today during science, we will be reading this wonderful book called A Warmer World, From Polar Bears to Butterflies, How Climate Change Affects the World. This book is written by Caroline Arnold and illustrated by Jamie Hogan. By looking at this book, can we make some educated guesses on what we think this book might be about? What do we think the words climate change mean? Think about what the word climate means and then think about change. What does change mean? As we're doing that, let's take a look inside the book and see the illustrations that were made. We have some polar bears, some red foxes, some planets, some more polar bears, a walrus, and some penguins. So we can see that these illustrations are very nicely done. Now let's jump into reading this great book called A Warmer World. A Warming World. In 1964, a biologist working in the cloud forest of Costa Rica found a tiny toad whose bright yellow skin shone like a jewel. He named it Golden Toad. Once a year, these toads came out of their burrows, mated, and laid eggs in small pools on the forest floor. After the eggs hatched, the tadpoles lived in the shallow water as they grew into toads. In the spring of 1987, the weather was unusually warm and dry. The puddles dried up soon after the eggs hatched. By the next year, almost all the toads were gone. Since 1989, no one has ever seen golden toads anywhere. Golden toads need the mist of the cloud forest to keep their skin moist and rain pools to hatch their eggs. So we know that the sun has dried up all of the rain and the mist, but the golden toads need that rain and mist to survive. That's how they lay their eggs, and that's how they live. As the earth has warmed, the clouds in the mountains of Costa Rica have risen higher and higher. The climate is no longer suitable for golden toads and many other animals that once lived in the cloud forest. Golden toads are one of the first known victims of climate change. There's our word of the day, guys, climate change. Think about it. What is happening to these animals? A changing climate. Earth's climate has been changing for 1 billion of years, warming and cooling many times. Recently, it has been growing warmer at a faster rate than ever before. Winters are shorter, springs are earlier, and summers are hotter. In the last century, the average world temperature has risen more than 1 degree Fahrenheit. This may not seem like a lot, but a little change can make a very big difference. Climate is the average weather in a particular place measured over time. Weather is the state of the atmosphere around us at a particular place and time. In other words, climate is what you expect, for example, a wet spring. So sometimes we might have a dry summer where it doesn't rain at all, and that is our climate, a dry summer. And weather is what you get, for example, a thunderstorm. So the weather is, today it's sunny outside, tomorrow it's raining, and the day after that it snowed. That is all weather. As the world was warm, scientists have noticed many changes. Polar sea ice is shrinking and growing thinner. Sea levels are rising and patterns of rainfall are changing. Animals have responded to these changes as they search for food, shelter, and other things they need to live. In some cases, animals can adapt to new conditions. In others, their lives are threatened as the environment changes. So what happens, boys and girls, if all of the ice melts up and the weather becomes warmer in the Arctic, the water becomes warmer? How are the polar bears going to live if they have to live in cold climate, in a cold atmosphere? What is going to happen to them? Think, what will happen to the polar bears? Wildlife in a warmer world. As world temperatures rise, places that were once cool become warmer. Plants and animals can grow in places that were once too cold for them. Foxes. Red foxes are found throughout most of the northern hemisphere, from the Arctic Circle to the Central America and North Africa. They They live mainly in forests and brushland, where they eat a wide range of prey and plant foods. Arctic foxes are short, compact, densely furred animals that thrive in some of the coolest places on Earth. They are found mainly in the treeless regions of the Arctic. These foxes hunt birds and small mammals, and they scavenge carcasses of animals killed by larger predators. As Earth's climate has warmed, trees and brush have begun to grow in areas of the Arctic that were once too cool for these plants. So red foxes have expanded their territory into places normally used for smaller Arctic foxes. The Arctic foxes have to compete with red foxes for available food. Because the climate has changed, it has ruined some of the parts where these foxes live. So now they have to go and they have to fight for an area with a different type of fox called the Arctic fox. And they're competing with each other for any food that's still available for them. Escaping the heat. As the world gets warmer, some places are becoming too hot for the plants and animals that live there. Animals can walk, fly, or swim to find a new place to live, but plants cannot move. Their seeds are carried to new locations by wind, water, and sometimes animals. If conditions are suitable, the seeds may grow into new plants. So climate change does greatly affect our animals, but it also affects the plants, and the plants have a harder time surviving because they can't just get up and walk away to a new place. They are sometimes stuck staying where they are, and the plants will die off. And we know how much we need plants to live. Plants affect our daily lives too. Higher and cooler. As you climb up a mountain, the air becomes cooler. Each level on the mountain has its own zone with specific kinds of plants and animal communities. As the global temperatures rise, plants and animals in lower life zones may move to higher elevations. Species that live at the highest life zones have nowhere else to go to find cooler temperatures. The disappearing ice. As Earth warms, the most dramatic changes are occurring in the polar regions. The North Pole is in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, which is covered by a vast sheet of ice. In the summer, some of the ice melts. In the winter, it will freeze again. The South Pole is in the center of the Antarctica, and the continent covered with the large sheets of ice. These polar areas are warming faster than other parts of the world. The light color of the ice and the snow reflects the sun's heat back into the atmosphere, while the dark color of land and open water absorbs the heat. As ice melts, more water and land is exposed, and the temperature increases even faster than before. Scientists worry because the North Pole's ice cap has shrunk 20% in size since 1979. That's not that long, guys. If only 20%. Many scientists predict that the Arctic Ocean will be ice-free in the summer of 2030 or even sooner. Scientists also worry that Antarctic ice sheets might collapse. The collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet could raise sea levels by as much as 19 feet. Warmer ocean water has already caused huge ice shelves around the edge of the continent to break up. Polar animals depend on ice, and as the ice disappears, their lives are threatened. So our polar animals, such as our polar bears, are depending on these ice sheets to live. They are melting so quickly and there's not enough around, and it's really affecting their lifestyle, and their lives are being threatened. Polar bears are on the verge of becoming extinct. Here we have a nice little story about polar bears in here. Polar bears are perfectly adaptable to life in the Arctic. Compact bodies, dense fur coats, and a thick layer of fat to help them keep warm. And their huge feet are good for swimming and walking across snow and ice. All winter long, polar bears prowl the ice in search of seals, walruses, and other marine animals. When the ice melts in the spring, the polar bears go on shore. They live on their stored fat and do not hunt again until the ocean freezes in the fall, and they can go back on the ice. So polar bears hunt one time. They only eat one time, and they're able to live off their fat. They're not like us that has to eat every day. Now that the sea ice in the Arctic is freezing later each fall and melting earlier in the spring, polar bears have less time to hunt and build up fat for the summer. They are now thinner and less healthy than they were 20 years ago, and females are giving birth to fewer cubs. So if females are giving birth to fewer cubs, guys, that means there aren't that many polar bears being reproduced. That means we have less polar bears right now. Our good friend, the walruses, in the summertime when ice melts along the Arctic coast, walruses feed on clams, crabs in the shallow water. Large chunks of ice float like islands along the shore, and the walrus uses sea ice as a resting platform, pulling themselves up with their long tusks. Pups wait on the ice while their mothers dive for food. As more sea ice melts, these islands become fewer and farther from shore, and there are no platforms in shallow water for their mothers and their pups. The pups often become separated from their mothers and cannot survive on their own. We learn about penguins, who are also becoming extinct because it is way too warm for them to survive, just like our friends the polar bears. Let's go into changing seasons. In a warmer world, the higher temperature of spring comes earlier and cooler temperatures in the fall begin later. Patterns of rainfall and drought also change. Drought is when it doesn't rain for a very long period of time. These shifts have affected the way animals migrate, lay eggs, and hibernate to find food. Warmer water. Water-dwelling plants and animals have also been impacted by climate change. Water in the world's oceans, lakes, and rivers is growing warmer, affecting corals, fish, and many other species. So warmer water is hurting our fish and all the animals that live in the sea. It's really, really affecting them. The fish in the oceans and lakes are sensitive to water temperatures. Fish such as trout and salmon prefer cool water and thrive in streams with temperatures of 50 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. In many areas, the fish are already living at the upper end of their temperature range, so even a small amount of working can make the streams uninhabitable. Scientists predict that trout and salmon may disappear from as much as a third of their current habitat by the year 2090 due to global warming. On the other hand, some fish, such as a largemouth bass and carp, which do well in warm water, could expand their ranges throughout the United States and Canada. If the water surface temperature goes up by 4 degrees, they could live 400 miles further north than they do now. The rising sea levels. As land-based ice in polar regions melt, water flows into the sea and makes oceans higher. The ice is melting. Think about what happens if you have an ice cube and you leave it out and you let it melt. It becomes water. So these icebergs are all melting and they're becoming water and they're going into the sea, and it's making the water levels rise, which is not good for our sea levels. Sea levels are also rising because when water heats up, it expands and takes up more space. Over the last 100 years, the world's sea level has risen about 6 to 8 inches. By 2100, it is expected to go up 3 more feet. A future warmer world. Hundreds of species have already been affected by the rising temperatures in the world. These animals, from tiny frogs and butterflies to polar bears and whales, show us how even a small change in temperature can produce big changes in lifestyle. Some scientists estimate that 1 million species are threatened with extinction. That word extinction means that the animals are going to die off. There are not going to be any more animals left because of climate change. The world has warmed many times before. This time, however, it is warming so quickly that scientists worry plants and animals will not have time to adapt. Adapt means to get used to their new environment. If this happens, the loss in the biodiversity could be devastating. Pollutants in the Earth's atmosphere that trap the sun's heat have accelerated the pace of global warming. Learning how to control pollution can help us slow the rate of climate change, giving people and wildlife more time to adapt. Global warming will continue to change the world in which we live. By learning how plants and animals are responding to these changes, we can better understand what to expect in a future warmer world. So there's a lot that we could do, boys and girls, to help people become more aware of global warming. We are going to make some posters to help people become more aware, and show them what they can do to help prevent global warming from happening so quickly, because global warming is happening at a very quick rate, and we as people and our animals do not have time to adapt to the changes that are being made in the world. After that, we're going to do a graphic organizer, which you will answer some questions about how global warming will affect the state of New York in which we live in, and how global warming will affect you personally. I would like you all to get up from the reading rug and move into your small groups to work with your groups on your posters and on your graphic organizers.